In this video, I'm going to make a set of scales using the minimal amount of tools. I'm going to be starting out with some 1/8 inch Coca-Cola wood. To start out with, I'm going to glue the two pieces of wood together with a piece of paper in the middle. Now I'm tracing the blade that I'm going to use. I'm going to draw the scale shape on top of this. Now I'm going to rough out the scale shape. I cut the paper template off of the drawing and now I'm transferring it to the Coca-Cola. I'm using a yellow colored pencil because it shows up well on the dark wood. And instead of tracing around the perimeter, I'm making a lot of little dashes around the outside. And then I'll go back through and connect the dots to make the shape I need to cut out. I'm going to cut it out using my coping saw. Notice I have the blade twisted a little bit in the coping saw so the frame won't get in the way. And when I saw it out, I don't worry about getting it to the exact shape. The only thing I worry about is staying to the outside of the line, because it's pretty easy to sand down to the line with this thin of wood. So now that I got it sawed out, I'm gonna work around the outside perimeter of it and try to get that shape done first. I'm using some pretty coarse sandpaper. I'm using some 60 grit sandpaper. And I'll continue using the 60 grit till I get the shape finished. I'm shaping with it. And I'm using the pink pearl eraser as a sanding pad. And here's the pin vise. I'm drilling the first hole. I have the perimeter shaped. That was really about 20 minutes worth of sanding. Now I'm marking out where I'm going to put the second pinhole. I'm seeing how far the blade's going to go down. The little pin vise with a 1/16 of an inch bit really does pretty good in this thin of wood. Now that I have the holes drilled, I'm going to start rounding off the two sides. Again, I'm using the 60 grit sandpaper. I'm going to keep using it till I get the scales shaped the way I want them. And this shaping the scales was about another 30 minutes worth of work. Shaped and broke all the corners with 60 grit, and then I moved up to 80 grit, then 100, 150, and 220 grit. And when you use an 1/8 of an inch wood, it's pretty chunky for scales, but if you thin the ends out, it gives the appearance of the scales being thinner and lighter. So here I am thinning out the two ends, or the scales on the ends. So here the scales are sanded up to 220 grit now. I'm cutting the paper in half with a razor blade. Going to separate the two halves. Now I'm scraping off the glue spots with a razor blade. Now I'm marking where the wedge is going to go, or I'm marking how far the blade goes down so I'll know where to put the wedge. Now I'm marking out the wedge. I have it lined up with a line I drew on the inside of the scales, and now I'm marking it. Now I'm using the pin vise just to transfer the hole where it's going to go. Now I'm drilling out the wedge with the pin vise. And I'm cutting out the wedge, and again the only thing I'm really being critical of is to make sure I stay a little bit to the outside of the lines when I saw. Now that I have the wedge cut out, I'm tapering it. I'm holding down that piece of 60 grit sandpaper flat, and I'm got a lot more pressure on my thumb, and I'm tapering the wedge. One side of it has barely any pressure, and I have a lot of pressure bearing down on the other side, so it's tapering it as I go back and forth. Now I'm gluing it all up. I have a brass rod in there for alignment purposes. I have a brass rod on both ends. I just glued one side of the wedge in. Now I'm gluing up the other side. And I'm going to put a spring clamp on it and let it dry for a while. And I got a pin on both ends for alignment purposes. Now the glue's dry. I'm using the 60 grit paper again to sand down the wedge flush with the wood. And again, I'll go through the grits. I'll sand it flush with the 60 grit, then I'll do 100, 150, 220 to get it smooth again. Here I am smoothing it up with some 220. So there they are. And now I'm going to put a coat of shellac on it. That's shellac on the rag right in my hand. And I'm just wiping on a thin coat of shellac on the insides and outside. And I'm wiping the shellac on, and then I'm wiping off the excess. And then I'll steel wool it, and I'll have several iterations of that. I'll put on a coat, steel wool it, put on a coat and steel wool it. And I usually just put shellac on with a rag or a paper towel. And there's the finished blade. Thanks.